Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to our live streaming festival / symposium / Zoom conference / experimental opening of Critical Zones. And as you can see, we here in the team, we're already a little bit tired, but we are still so happy to be with you and to welcome you to the second part of the second day of our festival. So as we said before, this is one amazing experiment to us. As a cultural institution, our main challenge is to keep testing and reinventing access and participation, especially in these unusual times where it's not possible for us to host guided tours or workshops or do a real live opening with all of you here. And yesterday was the first day of our experiment, and to be honest, we were overwhelmed. Apparently over 10,000 clicks into our program. We really don't know what to say to this, except thank you so much for your support and for all your love, actually, on Telegram. So we have Bruno Latour live on Zoom from France, and we have Peter WEIBEL, CEO of ZKM, and our wonderful colleague Anett Holzheid, who will be moderating the live panel discussions. Dear Anett, I'm really looking forward to this third panel discussion tonight. Take it away.
Thank you, dear Barbara. With great delight, I am taking the floor to introduce you, dear online audience, to our third panel discussion on the Critical Zones topics. And please do passionately get involved in the conversation we will be having during the next 60 minutes with Bruno Latour, Peter WEIBEL, and two distinguished guests, which I will be introducing to you in a second. This remarkable field of multidisciplinary inquiry on which the Critical Zones exhibition is mounted, thanks to Bruno Latour and Peter WEIBEL's fascinating collaboration, brings together in a most unique fashion scholarly devotion, a powerful drive to tackle complexity, tough questions, and a lot of data across the natural sciences and the humanities. This scientific scholarly networks in which the exhibition is enmeshed shows a great and impressive stamina to stand perplexity and an audacious resistance against buying into easy solutions. It is sheer impossible to not get passionate about the Critical Zones exhibition. Now, with an eye on the Zoom camera, I must say it is absolutely wonderful to seeing that our great guests are ready to start. Let me introduce to you our first speaker tonight, Karen Holmberg. Karen, it's wonderful that you are with us. You are with us from New York. Karen is an archaeologist, volcanologist, and currently teaches environmental science at New York University. Karen entwines her fields of study to look at the long-term experience of human life with radical environmental changes of the past to query how the past can inform the present and the future. She currently leads a transdisciplinary team to examine a prehistoric rock art site in Chile, where resettlement is ongoing following an unexpected volcanic eruption. She is also co-director of the New York Virtual Volcanoes Observatory. She contributed her knowledge to the Critical Zones exhibition both in the catalog and in the virtual exhibition platform. Karen, we are most excited about your impulse talk about landing on the terrestrial volcano. Warm welcome to you.
Hello from New York City.
Thank you. Our second guest speaker will be from Paris, Jérôme Gaillardet. Welcome, Jérôme. Jérôme is...
Welcome, thank you.
Let me introduce you to our online audience for a second. Jérôme is critical zone scientist and a very well-known geochemist and potamologist who contributes highly to the critical zone studies becoming a new scientific paradigm. Jérôme is professor of earth science at the Institut de Physique du Globe at the Université de Paris. With his research team, he studies the geochemistry of the Earth's surface. He takes up many initiative roles within the Critical Zones Observatory network, and he is a principal investigator for developing intelligent sensors of the critical zone. Jérôme, you will be talking about the critical zone as buffer and human habitat tonight. Hi, and very welcome to the show.
Hello.
Before we start with Karen's impulse talk, maybe Bruno, you would like to have a first thought on the volcanic terrestrial?
Well, I have to welcome my friends, and I have to mention that the only person among all of those during these 3 days who speak about critical zone, the only one who is actually at the origin of this exhibition and the origin of this generalized use of the word is Jérôme, because that's when I met Jérôme that I got completely taken in by this expression of critical zone, but he was already for many years advanced into this field. So it's a great pleasure to meet again virtually Jérôme, although I see that the lock-in meant that there is no access to haircutters. And it's, of course, a great pleasure to meet Karen, whom I met later when we were preparing the catalog. And it's very significant of the exhibition we try to do to connect scientists of different domains and some people who are connected with art, like the work that you saw yesterday from Alexandra and Soel is, of course, completely influenced and monitored by Jérôme. So I'm very glad to meet both of them.
Wonderful. So we are ready to listen to Karen's talk now.
Thank you. And thank you for the gracious welcome and introduction. Hello from New York City, epicenter of many things. Right now, that's not necessarily a good thing in the case of the pandemic. I'm going to be talking about my views of the volcano and how I view it as an observatory. It's a way of looking into the deep interior of the Earth and its materials, as well as at changing landscapes on the surface, at upper atmospheric currents, and then out at other planets to understand what makes Earth unique, and it is unique. In my research as an archaeologist and volcanologist, I examine the volcano not only as a geophysical force, but also as a metaphor for an Earth or nature that has changed radically and unexpectedly in the past, and try to determine what, if anything, that has to say to us in the 21st century. Now, a volcano in eruption is the epitome of a dynamic, living Earth. It's a form of planetary transformation and earthly agency that we've experienced literally for millions of years as a species, if you go back to Latour 3.7 million years ago. As with our far longer term experience of volcanic eruption, though, something that came up yesterday in the talks, there's this uncanny discomfort that we're discovering via the Anthropocene. It's the ability to perceive large-scale geological transformation on the human timescale. Usually those don't intersect. Climate change provides an existential sense of the Earth being in revolt. And how we image and imagine this in the 21st century and beyond is important. So ice, something that also came up yesterday, is at the forefront of the Anthropocene imagination of earthly revolution. We closely monitor ice shelves and the iceberg calving that is reducing them. We're holding funerals for melting glaciers. We've fetishized polar bears on shrinking ice. Is there a volcano that can help update the Vesuvian metaphor of how nature and the human engage? That metaphor being the classic Western one of sort of nature looming over the imperiled culture represented by Pompeii. How do we transform that for the 21st century when culture now imperils nature? Well, personally, I would say that imagery of the lava lake at Erebus volcano in Antarctica offers a stunning as well as pointed possible option as a new volcano metaphor. And the image that you see right now was taken by the wonderful Clive Oppenheimer, volcanologist at Cambridge and recently collaborator with Werner Herzog. The molten lava in the picture, seen from above with only a smattering of ice near it, feels ominous, at least for me. I've started to feel protective of ice. Melting polar caps will rewrite world maps as we know them. Erebus, with its ice caves juxtaposed with lava, is, at least for me, a graphic visual metaphor of endangered ice. Other volcanoes also capably embody contemporary issues, anxieties, and tensions, and also bring in more of the cultural component. Some of my favorites as nominations would be Mount Taranaki in New Zealand. It's a very Anthropocene volcano. It was granted personhood in a move to acknowledge its sacredness to the Maori. The volcano now has legal protections in a court of law that humans can invoke on its behalf. Mauna Kea is another. Scientific desires to construct the 30-meter telescope and indigenous cosmologies of the volcano's sacredness clash acerbically on the Hawaiian volcano. It's Mauna Loa, though, that for me is a strong candidate. The volcano in Hawaii from which the carbon dioxide measurements that comprise the Keeling curve are taken. Mauna Loa is most certainly one of our most iconic contemporary volcano metaphors in its relationship to technology, climate, and ice. Through Mauna Loa, we know that emissions from fossil fuel use are driving our atmospheric carbon dioxide ever higher, driving up surface temperatures, and then threatening the cryosphere, the icy portion of the planet. And then there is Alba Mons. It's on Mars, and yet it's a volcano that has everything to do with our current earthly relationship. Now, what you see in this picture is the Mars Ice House, designed by Melody Yashar with Space Exploration Architecture Search Plus and Clouds AO. The Mars Ice House was the winning design of a NASA competition for a 3D printed habitat made of ice by robots. Ice, at risk from us on Earth, serves in the design as protection to us from radiation on Mars. The design places it on the flanks of Alba Mons, where speculatively the caves and lava tubes of the volcano may offer further shield from radiation. Now, a more recent design, the Mars X House, relocates the habitat away from the volcano to the equinoctial region of Mars, to use early volcanologist Alexander von Humboldt's preferred word for the equator, and constructs it from volcanic basalt. The premise of Mars colonization is the concept that the Earth will eventually become a locus of uninhabitable nature. This Martian volcano has everything to do with our odd thoughts about the Earth in that sense. That which often endangers us here, the volcano, and that which we endanger, ice, will somehow save us. Bruno Latour asks us to decide where to land when we come down to Earth. I might choose to land on Mars, though. This is not because I think that we should live there. I see Mars colonization as traitorous to the Earth that created us. Could I land there in protest, though, to highlight all that is currently alarming with our relationship to the Earth? If the thought game does not permit such a thing, I can find a place on our own planet. To better envision our earthly relationship between volcanoes, ice, and human life, there are few better natural laboratories than Iceland, for example. If one wants to get down to earth and thinking through environmental change via experiences of stones that speak and glaciers that weep, in the context of the eruption that covered the island of Heimeia in lava, Iceland amply permits this. And in saying that, that's actually an intentional play on words. Icelandic anthropologist Gisli Pálsson has a newly translated memoir by that exact name, Down to Earth, about his childhood home of Heimeia and its fissure eruption. Philosophically, Iceland also allows for poignantly beautiful reflection via meditation at the edge of Askja by the remarkable philosopher Paul Skalason, in which the volcano incorporates the external reality of geological power as well as its very individual phenomenological elements. We could all learn from standing at the edge of Askja. In the end, though, I will choose to crawl inside the critical zone just a little. I would like to slip under its skin in a way that allows a sense of contact with all that has been in the past, and yet does not negate the role of technology and a desire for an inhabitable future nature. So the imagery that you are seeing is photogrammetry data collected and processed by an exceptional new media artist and researcher and cherished collaborator, Andrés Burbano, along with Pierre Puentes. Andrés took the photogrammetry imagery, let me just let you know that you can drag it around. It is 360. And also in your settings, if you go to 4K at least, you will get the best experience. Andrés took the photogrammetry imagery along with 360 video from drones at a prehistoric archaeological site in Chile, where I serve as principal investigator or lead scientist for a transdisciplinary research team. It became part of an immersive piece that was supposed to be physically installed at ZKM earlier this month. Because COVID-19 prompted the virtual opening for Critical Zones show, you are now able to see this imagery, and I hope you will do so, on the ZKM website, along with a voiceover and music by a super talented young artist and sound designer, Jack Helfrich. Now, we named the 4 clips that are on there. It's divided into 4 pieces in relation to the critical zone. You have outside, which is eruption. It's satellite modeling of the topography and the ash plume of the Chaitén volcano in Chile. Above Patagonia, it's 360 video taken by drones, and then leading up the beach to the natural monument where the caves are located. Inside cave, it's the point cloud of photogrammetry data. It's what you're looking at now, that then melts into visual imagery of the rock art and the graffiti that either defaces or joins the prehistoric art, depending on your vantage. And then beyond, which is Mars. So back to slipping under the skin of the critical zone. For me, this comes in the marriage of the prehistoric creativity embodied by rock art within a cave located in the water-worn plug of an ancient extinct volcano with the continually evolving forms of immersive imaging technology that we are now able to access. The cave is located on a coastline in Patagonia where glaciers retreated, sea levels rose, and a nearby volcano, Chaitén, erupted repeatedly and regularly. It erupted again in 2008, unexpectedly. It was a site of disaster. The town of Chaitén, though, is now the center of a creative explosion through a literary festival held on the eruption anniversary, a new geological awareness and interest amongst residents, and the creation of a museum to display, amongst other items, the products of art therapy aimed at helping with the trauma of an Earth that revolted. It is the site of millennia of ongoing creative involvement with a dynamic nature. It is surviving. The cave is sometimes used as metaphor for something we should escape, or that from which we have outgrown via technology. I personally would prefer to creep inside one, particularly if it's volcanic, and learn what it might have to say, rather than hurtle towards a multi-planet future for our species. It will take creativity to live in a future Earth. It always has, though. This is the constant of our past, our present, and future. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for your insightful talk. Wonderful. Bruno, would you like to add something?
Well, it's very interesting to have the work of Karen in the show. If you have seen, I hope you have, the beautiful lecture by Joseph Kerner an hour ago, where he talked about the romantic artwork, especially Gaspar Friedrich and the interest into the underground. It has a very interesting connection with Karen because, and we will have to discuss that with Jérôme, and we discussed that yesterday with Tim Lenton, there is a slight tension between the word critical zone with Gaia and, of course, the volcano that Karen studies and that Jérôme knows very well, have in a way to escape the Gaiesque or the Gaian evolution of life, so to speak. So they are a sort of counter argument. But Karen's work, what is so interesting is that she managed to, on the contrary, fuse the volcano, which obviously have coming from some forces which have nothing to do with life and nothing to do with human, into precisely not only works of art, but also a deep understanding, I mean, deep in the literal sense, of where we are and where we land. So I'm interested to know from her in which way it has a connection with the Anthropocene argument, because the volcanoes themselves are not touched by any force which is equivalent to them from the human, that Jan Zalazevich yesterday mentioned. So she mentioned at the beginning of her lectures the link with the Anthropocene. I see the cultural link, but I'd like to know, I'm sure she has an idea about physical link.
Well, the volcano has everything to do with the Anthropocene and the idea of geoengineering in particular. There's one particular eruption, 1991 in Pinatubo in the Philippines, where those emissions are used to model how much aerosol went up, how much cooling occurred, and is the premise for a lot of these ideas. And this came up yesterday too, in terms of is the Earth a machine that we can tinker with? Can we change it? You know, can we try to adjust things ourselves, or is it so much more complex that we can't? You know, without serious feedback loops or unexpected consequences. The idea that and again, I'm coming from a very particular vantage because I'm fully in favor of Mars exploration in terms of scientific data, but the idea of colonizing it sets my teeth on edge. Geoengineering does the same thing to my teeth. It doesn't feel good. So the idea that the volcano is completely what we're modeling on after that, without kind of thinking of these larger consequences that could stem off of it, is something that really interests me, particularly to the critical zone. And this was something that was interesting yesterday in the Telegram chats that were going on during the talks. This concept of I'm not sure what the critical zone is. And I've Googled it and I'm still not sure, people were saying. And just this concept that it's describing something that we don't know enough about or don't know much about. And I thought that Bettina yesterday was remarkable in the way that she explained how the volcano connects the very deep portions of the earth with the upper, atmosphere. But it has everything to do with the critical zone. And that's where its impact is upon us. But don't know anything about the inner earth as well. Like there's these things that I like it when they get called scientifically earth blobs, but these LLSVPs, large, low shear velocity provinces, there are 2 continent-sized blobs underneath the earth, and we don't know what they are, what they do, how long they've been there. We just know that they're probably important. So we're able to know more about the surface of Mars or the surface of the moon than we are about our own planet that we're on, and yet we're thinking of going to other planets to permanently set up settlement. So it all starts to revolve a bit in your head when you think about it a bit too much.
Bruno, please.
No, I understood the answer. I was just trying to push this discussion between, obviously the link between the volcano and critical zone is very strong, and actually Jérôme will talk more about that. But the link with Gaia is always disputable. And in the Anthropocene, the whole idea is that there is a feedback loop between what we do to the habitability of the planet in the life forms and what they do to us. I'm not sure if I follow Karen in seeing the same thing in the volcano. There is a unilaterality, so to speak, in the influence of the volcano onto the life in general and human in particular, which is not is precisely what the Anthropocene is not about. The Anthropocene is about the fact that there is a reaction to our actions, so to speak. And the distance in size and energy with the volcano seemed, I would have said, to let the volcano out of the Anthropocene. But this is, I'm playing the devil advocate here.
In terms of relationship to Gaia, too, I think for me the interesting thing about the volcano is the fact that it's not just a geophysical body. It's very much alive, and we can't think about it because it's so much larger than us without resorting to metaphors, can we? It's born, it's young, it gets old, it dies, it has a neck, it has fingers, it has toes. It gets angry in many reports of eruptions. It's this concept of metaphor that came up too in some of the discussions about how do we not resort to metaphor. And I think when we're thinking of something that's so much larger than us, it's very difficult not to resort to those. But in relation to Gaia, the volcano is just sort of emblematic of this agent, this active agent and this living agent that's part of this dynamic Earth.
Thank you, Karen, for your profound lecture. I have 2 layman's questions. We human beings, we experience volcano eruptions as an entropic experience, something negative. So my question is, do a volcano play a positive role for the critical zone, a positive role for the skin of the Earth? This is my first question. The second question is, do you really think that humanity can land on the Mars sometime in the future?
All right. For your first question, that's it's very Shakespearean, right? The diseased nature oftentimes what breaks forth, these strange eruptions. That was from Henry IV. It's something that we've for hundreds of years seen it as an anomaly. But this recent eruption of Kilauea, for example, we've learned something we never knew, that when the lava goes into the water, both the temperature and the minerals that are added lead to phytoplankton blooms. There's a regeneration of life there. Why is it that volcanic soils are so fertile? You know, it's the minerals from within the earth that are being added to the soil. So there's a destruction, but a creativity that's inherently linked in there. So it's also the motor, the engine of the planet as well, and what makes it livable and creating the atmosphere to begin with. So there is something. In terms of Mars colonization, in having this conversation with Melody Yashar, who was gracious to share her imagery, her renderings of her designs for the Mars Ice House and X House, she said to me, you know, it's years and years off. We'll probably be on the moon first before being on Mars. But what I liked about what she had to say was that she was hoping that the work and the intelligence and creativity that went into those designs would actually be used here on Earth, where those houses, those 3D printed by robot houses, could actually be of service in areas where people do need housing in emergency situations in particular.
Coming back to the eruptions of volcanoes, that means we human beings should not only be afraid, we could even be grateful because they are helping us, volcanic eruptions.
They are us, right? They're part of the entire planet that we're all entwined with. And that's the whole concept, I think, that we're all chewing through in these 3 days, are all these interconnections, and how everything is more complexly entangled than we would have realized. So yes, without the volcano, no us.
At what period of time a serious scientific study of a volcano started? Was it the 20th century only, or was it already started in the 19th century?
I'd push it back to Athanasius Kircher, my favorite character. He invented a vomiting mechanical lobster. It would vomit for verisimilitude. He invented a cat piano where you would bang on cats' tails with different pitched yells. And he had himself lowered with a rope inside Vesuvius to understand it better. And he did this beautiful rendition, which I know is in the book in several places when I saw that quick flip through, and is also in our video pieces of what the subterranean Earth looked like in his conception. And he viewed it as inverted cosmology, whereas the sun is to the solar system, sort of the inner Earth, the mantle, the core is to the planet, and did these fantastical drawings that are absolutely beautiful and totally scientifically incorrect.
Okay. So we have a question from the audience. It goes to Bruno and Karen. In Bruno's talk, he referred to the power and command of people and a warning we shouldn't turn away. But Karen points out that geoengineering poses many dangers precisely because we are not in command. So how do these ideas meet for the critical zone?
Well, I think I will let Karen answer that one, because she is much fresher in the troop of the people who are running this show. And that's a tough question.
It's a really tough question. Can you rephrase it or give me the nugget of it towards the geoengineering?
Sure. Okay. In Bruno's talk, he referred to the power and command of people and a warning we shouldn't turn away. But Karen points out that geoengineering poses many dangers precisely because we are not in command. So how do these ideas meet for the critical zone?
Yeah, I'm going to have to let Bruno figure out how those meet in the critical zone, but I'm going to deal just with the portion on I guess, good design and planning and collection of data. There's a poem that I love by Stéphane Mallarmé. The English translation is a throw of the dice does not abolish chance, where no matter how much data is collected, you're not going to be able to necessarily predict or control something. And that is my personal stance on geoengineering and collection of this sort of data. We are not the ones in control of these forces, no matter how much data we collect on. And I think what I need to, I guess, impress is that I think that the volcano offers us, and this is something that is very Humboldtian as well, it offers us a way to understand the planet writ large because it is extreme. It's a way of understanding the larger planet and our intersection with it. We don't control the volcano, just like we don't control the planet. No matter how much data we collect, we're not going to be able to predict an eruption perfectly, but we're also not going to be able to stop that. So it becomes a situation where you need to live with it.
Karen, it's wonderful to hear that refer to Mallarmé's poem, Un coup d'idée jamais abolira le hasard.
That one, yes.
Thank you. And that means in mathematics, we believe in random structure, even of mathematics. Do you ever think also that in the study of volcano, we have a random element we can never control?
What we can do is this, and this is what we have, or we run up against with our climate models as well. You cannot predict the future if it's not somehow patterned off of the past. So when there's an unprecedented event, and I think that's why we're having so much of an existential kind of grappling with coronavirus too. These low frequency, high magnitude events are things that we don't know how to plan for, and we don't know how to kind of process and deal with. So I think I'll leave that one with that, but I do love that poem.
Well, I think several times Karen said, what is the critical zone? So I think we should now hear about Jérôme, who has the papal authority, so to speak, on the question of critical zone, because he not exactly invented the term, but he developed it in Europe immensely. And maybe we, at some point in the 3 days, we need a point. What is the critical zone? And I think Jérôme would be perfect to do it.
Thank you, Bruno. Let's roll the film by Jérôme, Critical Zone as Buffer and Human Habitat.
So good evening. I am Jérôme Gaillardet. I'm a scientist at Institut de Physique du Globe de Paris in France, and I'm leading a geochemistry group in which we are using isotopes of different chemical elements to, let's say, see the invisible. In other words, to identify the transformations occurring at the Earth's surface, and in particular to trace the influence of human activities. I'm also coordinating the French network of critical zone observatories named OSCAR, trying to play a role at the European and international levels to build up a global network of observatories. This helps me trying to be a critical zone scientist, in addition to be a specialized geochemist, and I will try to explain why in the following minutes. So what is the critical zone from the point of view of a scientist? The critical zone of the Earth is the thin layer, the veneer at the surface of the Earth, which is lying between, let's say, the unweathered rocks beneath our feet and the sky. We could call it the soil, but this would be a very poor description of this very complex and heterogeneous zone actually made of multiple components: rivers, groundwater, glaciers, fractures in rock in which water percolates, the soil in its agronomic definition, the living organism above and below the ground, the landscape. All these compartments are connected. The quality of water, for example, depends on the rain, but also on the complex flow path that the water is following after it infiltrates. The idea is to look at the critical zone as a thing, like my colleague Bill Dietrich from Berkeley University often describes it, or an entity, like Sue Brantley at Penn State University is often calling it, meaning that it behaves as a system and not as a series of disconnected elements. What is complicated from a scientific point of view, once we have tried to define the critical zone, is that it's not only heterogeneous, but it is also changing over time scales, which are very variable. Some reactions, connections within the critical zone are fast, like the growth of a plant. Some of them are very slow, like the transformation of rocks into soil. That can take thousands of years. climate, geology, vegetation, humans are the drivers of the system. Overall, the critical zone is a sort of conflict zone between, on one hand, the solar energy, because if it rains, this is because the sun activates the water cycle, make the plants grow, for example, and the energy of the internal earth on the other end that creates the relief, the mountains, and uplift the rocks at the surface as a result of plate tectonics, which is activated by mantle convection. So at a given place, the critical zone is a kind of reactor, both fueled by solar and tectonic energies. Chemically, the critical zone is a reaction zone between the atmospheric CO2, which is an acid and reacts with the water and the rock minerals to form something new, something transformed, porous, permeable, light compared to the initial material. The chemical composition of rivers, of soils, result from this giant fight between the atmosphere, the water, and the rocks that created our habitat. A battle in which living organisms play a big role and make the Earth's surface habitable over geological time. A lot of scientific questions remain unsolved in the critical zone. Thinking as a critical zone scientist means trying to understand how the system works as a whole, how the different timescales from that of the bacteria to that of the continental drift are connected. It's trying to elucidate the invisible connections between the water, the soil, the air, the living organisms, and how they act to regulate at all timescales the system. Thinking as a critical zone scientist also means trying to step out from a disciplinary approach and think more holistically. The critical zone initiative is then also a way of reconnecting disciplines that have been separated during the history of sciences, because sciences have become more and more specialized with time, developed their own corpus of knowledge, specific languages, and at the end are not able to communicate with each other. In many countries, the critical zone scientific approach suffers from the old separation between the geological sciences and the ecological sciences. But understanding the critical zone requires to get rid of these institutional divergences and come back to a more unified scientific approach. This issue is also true when it comes not only to the research institutions, but also to the stakeholders. In France, for example, surface waters are legally monitored by one state institution, groundwaters by a separate one. But of course, everything is connected, and the unique situation we face in the Anthropocene needs us to urgently think differently, scientifically and institutionally. To improve their knowledge of the critical zone, scientists are organizing themselves around focal sites called critical zone observatories, or critical zones, as Bruno Latour often likes to call them. They are representative places defined by local geological, ecological, climatic conditions where the different disciplines can work together and adopt a whole system approach around scientific questions and hypotheses. These observatories have one overarching question, most of the time it's an environmental question, on which they were designed. There, frequent and long-term observations are made that rely on sophisticated field instrumentation. The United States of America were the first country in the world to set up and fund the Critical Zone Observatory Network. Now, in many places, networks of scientists from different disciplines are building networks of instrumented field sites and try to share common questions, conceptual models, interoperable databases. At the European scale, in 2018, the European Commission launched the construction of a pan-European infrastructure called ELTER to foster different types of national observatory from different disciplinary horizons to work together. Earth scientists, socioecologists, ecosystem scientists, soil scientists. This is a really unique experience, that opportunity that we European scientists are experiencing. These initiatives are important from the scientific point of view, as we hope to define our object to study the connections between living and non-living organisms, and with humans at the scale of territories, of instrumented fields sites. The description of the critical zone as a whole will be possible from the accumulation of a place-based knowledge, elucidating the mechanisms at play, calculating the fluxes of energy and matter along gradients, sampling the diversity of climate, geological and societal settings. Together, we hope to define a common metrics, common databases on essential variables and site hierarchies from across the continent. This effort that we scientists are doing is really important for a better public engagement in saving this common good that is the earth skin on which our daily life relies, monitoring it for understanding it and forecast it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jérôme. I would have a question. You mentioned the public engagement, the public audience. Do you have an example with an experience with the public audience, how you make them passionate about your scientific work?
Well, if you go in each of the critical zone observatories that scientists have been monitoring for decades or more, very often, the public is engaged. I mean, the local stakeholders are there. They are really interested by what is happening there. They're curious about what the scientists are doing. If you just take the example of the Steinbach Basin, you will very well exemplify this idea that citizens, organizations, they really care about what we're doing. And they, in a way, they recognize that monitoring is important, monitoring the critical zone as monitoring a patient in an hospital, in a way.
Jérôme, can you call the critical zone a movement in science? And how many members do you think are part of this movement? And how many observatories we can are available in the globe?
Yeah, I don't have the answer so far. The definition of a critical zonist is not very clear to me. We have a lot of people, for sure, scientists that want to go for a more unified scientific approach. And as I said, when you go to school, when you go to university, you specialize very rapidly, okay? And when you are interested by water, generally you don't do chemistry because chemistry is too far from, the motion mechanics of water motion in the soil or in the critical zone. And so we're facing a very simple issue that the different disciplines are not able to, to talk to each other. And when you have a public, or a citizen or a stakeholder that asks you a question, he doesn't care whether it's a geochemistry problem or an hydrology problem or, a problem related to relief. He wants the answer. So we, as scientists, we have the responsibility to do something to better, to have a more holistic approach. This is my perception of the critical zone. So there are many critical zone people in the world, and how many observatories? Again, the question is difficult. It depends what you call a critical zone observatory. So one option was followed in the US to develop a network of sites where all the disciplines are working together. This is, in Europe, we are having a slightly different approach, which is more based on building networks of sites where different processes are studied. But when you put all these sites into a single network, then people can start to interact to each other and to develop a common language. These are two slightly different approaches that, we have in Europe and in the US, but China has developed for a very long time a critical zone observatory networks and other countries in the world with always a slightly different view on what it should be.
Jérôme, I have the impression that I think several thousand scientists are working in the science of critical zones, and also several hundreds of observatories we have around the world. Could this be a correct estimate?
Oh, yeah, probably.
Bruno?
Bruno, you had a question.
Yes, in terms of history of science, the critical zone is a complex notion to address, because simultaneously, as Jérôme said, it's a way to make sure that disciplines collaborate together. So it's not a scientific concept. It has nothing unified about it. So, but it's the warning, so to speak. You cannot study water without studying biochemistry, and you cannot study chemistry without biochemistry, and so on. So it's a way to bring people together. This is why it's a good symbol or a good lead for an exhibition like ours, which is an extending numbers of disciplines collaborating. But, and I'd like to know more about that in Jérôme, there is also a very important drive to unify the notion of all of these connected elements in the critical zone, great attention to modeling. And I'd like to hear him tell us a little more about these mixtures of interest in unifying discipline, and that's a sort of science policy engagement, and another one at a deeper level, which is to modelize and unify, and that would become more like a scientific concept. This is important because, as you understand now, from all of the talk we heard yesterday and today, the fact of talking about critical zone allows to get out of the notion that when we study science, we study the whole of nature. So we concentrate attention on one little segment, so to speak, or this is why we use the expression skin of the earth, and that concentrate attention to a new object. So if there's still an uncertainty, is the critical zone a mot d'ordre, a way of bringing discipline together? Is it a scientific concept? And in this sense, it's more important. Or is it a way to requalify the notion of nature?
I think it's all together. I mean, it's a scientific move. It's a lot of scientists want to work together. Of course, it's motivated by the question that the society is asking us, of sure, but they also want to build models which are more complex in the sense that these models will take into account the local features. Okay, global climate models are global. Okay, there is usually not a lot of, there's no relief, you know, the earth is kind of flat. But when you want to predict the future of a given place on earth, they're no longer sufficient. You need to go into details. And then the speed, the wind velocity, the shape of the slope, the fact that the slope is north-faced or south-faced has a lot of influence. And then the scientific approach of the critical zone is to refocus, let's say, the modeling approach to a more detailed, geographically defined zone. This is in a way. And the other point in your question, Bruno, was about this kind of dilemma we scientists, because we are becoming more and more specialized. We have instruments which are incredible, but because they are able to see things that we were not able to see like 50 years ago. So we need process, of course, but we also need to be able to talk to each other. So there is a kind of balance to be found between the necessary specialization of sciences at the local scale and this kind of, to take a step back. you know, and to have a global at the local, but more general view of the way our territories are working. And of course, man is part of the system. It's not out of the system. It's one of the agents of the system.
So we have so many super interesting questions from our Telegram channel. And I would like to start with the first one because, Jérôme, you've been discussing a lot about, like you said, reconnecting science, but also specialization of sciences, but also reconnecting them. So we have this wonderful question by Vasilis Kolias, who says, do critical zone observatories interact with the people who carry traditional knowledge and have lived in those same places where the critical zone observatories are located? If they are excluded, is it not like recreating the nature-culture divide, he asks. So he's really asking not only about different scientific knowledge, but also scientific knowledge and traditional knowledge.
Yeah, it's a good point. For sure, the local people are involved. If you are interested by an observatory which is looking at the effect of agricultural practices on, let's say, nitrate cycle and the concentration of nitrates in groundwaters, you have to involve the farmers locally. You have to talk to them. You have to eventually make experiments, including them. And for the local cultures, I think the question is about non-Western countries, where the culture is not extractivism, but more into animists or other approaches, spiritual approaches. To be frank, I'm not aware of any critical zone observatory where this kind of issue is taken into account. But that would be a really nice way of creating new critical zone observatories.
So thank you very much for mentioning also the non-Western kind of knowledge, because actually Vasilis, who had asked this question, he had very specifically asked for traditional knowledge in France as the motherland of enlightenment. But in the entire Telegram group, the entire discussion today was very focused on the exclusiveness that we have today in our discourse that is very European-centric. So maybe this would be a good point now, maybe for you, Jérôme, because you already said a nice thing that this could be a point of inventing a new critical zone observatory. But maybe we can open up the discussion also more into that direction. Maybe, Bruno, you want to say something about that?
Well, I think the question you just asked should be that you relayed. It would be interesting to hear Karin about it. But I cannot not ask the question to Jérôme, which is, what does he feel to see a scientific concept brought out of all proportion into a museum with all sorts of mad people, artists, philosophers, activists of all sorts, and put into a popular term and being telegrammed about, and soon becoming a sort of common sense cliche where everyone says, yes, 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 we live on critical zone. And I cannot not ask this question.
It's a good question, Bruno. Yesterday, my daughter asked me what I was doing in this kind of exhibition opening. So exactly what you're mentioning. I'm really, surprised to be here, actually. 10 years ago, before I met you, Bruno, I would have never expected to be a part of a modern art, in a way, or media exhibition. But I'm very glad that the term critical zone is becoming so used and so popular, and is crossing the borders of scientific disciplines. I think the term critical, which for us scientists means a critical layer of the Earth as a self-regulating system. It's a physical definition of the critical zone. This term critical is also critical because, as Bruno often says, we have to care about it. So everybody on Earth, every human should be, should take care and should be aware that this zone, which is the zone on which we live, is critical, and so we have to pay attention to it. So yes, Bruno, I'm really, really surprised to be here, but I'm learning so much, and this is such a great experience that I'm living that I'm really, really happy.
If I'm allowed to ask just one more little question to you, could you mention and develop a little bit the work you did with Alexandra Arend, because she talked yesterday, and in the show there is a large part of the standback which is linked, but you learn from her a few things about the way to describe your own field. And I think that at this point in the discussion, something very enlightening for the audience.
Yeah, it's the same, exactly the same story. Alexandra is an architect. So at the beginning, I was wondering myself why an architect is interested by what I am doing. And in particular, I am leading a project, excellence project in France, which is called Critex, with which we built the river lab that we saw yesterday in the movie. And I realized then that it was kind of an architectural construction, this river lab, because it's a way of instrumenting nature. It's a way of collecting data that are offering us a new representation of nature. So with talking to Alexandra and to you, Bruno, as well, I became aware that there is not one representation of the critical zone. It depends on the sensitivity of the sensors that we are using, but there are many different representations. And what is interesting, I can tell you that it's working the other way around. Now we are just in the process of writing a new research proposal, and we included Alexandra in it. And we used the book that Alexandra, Frédéric Aitoiti, and Axel Grégoire wrote, because this illuminated us to show that what we're doing is really important from a philosophical point of view. And so it's interesting to see that Alexandra came to see us, and then now we are writing research proposal with her, trying to make the story successful. So I'm really glad about that. It's really opening our minds as scientists.
So talking about Alexandra and about observatories, we have another question from the audience. Could a critical zone observatory also function in a city? How would it possibly change its configuration?
Yeah, for sure. The city is a perfect critical zone, actually. And we have difficulties in instrumenting cities for many, many reasons that you can guess. I mean, there is some private property issues. The city is a very dense place, too many people, too many things happening, and that's very difficult to define a metrics of what we should measure, what we shouldn't measure, what is important, and how to model it. For example, if you want to look at the issue of how the water is percolating and circulating through a city, it's really, really difficult. We don't even know where the water, which is infiltrating in some rare places, is going. And you have these artificial networks, which are totally built by humans. There have been a lot of work done by a series of people in Europe and in the world on what they call the terrestrial metabolism, which is looking at the way, chemical elements, nitrates, phosphorus, is circulating in cities. And that's really fascinating to see that these cities are really interested in terms of system. If you have this system approach and you look at the way the elements and the matter is circulating through them, it's really a fascinating story. And it's very useful, to better manage our waste in particular, because as you know, phosphorus, we're just waiting our phosphorus because we don't recycle our phosphorus. We extract phosphorus from the earth, but we just leave it going to the ocean without caring about it. And one day we will run out of phosphorus. I'm sorry to say that.
Then I would thank Karen and Jérôme deeply for the inspiring lectures and for the privilege that you shared with us your knowledge in the research. And I have a question to Karin. Did I see your little sweet daughter also listening to our conversation?
She was. She's a smart cookie. She had some comments, and I said they were a little too pointed and snarky, and I sent her away.
Next time include her in the discussion. She's very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us your knowledge.
Yes,
Thank you.
from us as well. Really, what a wonderful panel this has been. And I always love it when the scientific meets the poetic. So I really enjoyed both Karen's and Jérôme's beautifully written talks. Thank you so much for it. And also, we saw through the Telegram chat how important it is to re-include also a plurality of knowledges in our discussion today. So really, thank you so much. And now we're going to take a 5 minutes technical break, because after that, we will be back with a virtual guided tour through the digital platform again with co-curator Martin Guinard.